Association and funded by student government. So I hope you all enjoy this program.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وله الحمد في السماوات والأرض وعشيا وحين تظهرون يخرج الحي من الميت ويخرج الميت من الحي ويحيي الأرض بعد موتها وكذلك تخرجون ومن آياته أن خلقكم من تراب ثم إذا أنتم بشر تنتشرون ومن آياته أن خلق لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا لتسكنوا إليها وجعل بينكم مودة ورحمة إن في ذلك لآيات لقوم يتفكرون ومن آياته خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف ألسنتكم وألوانكم إن في ذلك لآيات للعالمين. صدق الله العظيم.
Thank you, Brother Mahar. Now I'll ask Stephanie Saxman to come over and read the English translation of this verse, please.
And those who have falsely rejected our faith and falsely denied our signs and the meeting of the hereafter, such shall be brought forth to punishment. So give glory to God when you reach eventide and when you rise in the morning. Yea, to him be praised in the heavens and on earth and in the late afternoon and when the day begins to decline. It is he who brings out the living from the dead and brings out the dead from the living, and who gives life to the earth after it is dead, and thus shall you be brought out from the dead. Among his signs is this, that he created you from dust, and then, behold, ye are men scattered far and wide. And among his signs is this, that he created from you mates from among yourselves, that ye may dwell in tranquility with them, and he has put love and mercy between your hearts. Verily in that are signs for those who reflect. And among his signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the variations in your languages and your colors. Verily, in that are signs for those who know.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'll request Dr. Khan to come over and welcome our speaker on this campus.
It's certainly a pleasure for me this afternoon on behalf of the University Administration to welcome a very honored guest, a noted scholar. And this is a particular occasion for two reasons. As you know, during this period we're studying the importance of women in the development of our civilizations across and around the world, and their importance in a whole array of ways. And our topic today has to do with the women in Islam, women in the part of the world where Islam is the primary religion. It is also important that this is the period of Ramadan. I had the occasion many years ago in the 60s to spend the better part of a month of Ramadan in Morocco, and at that point got a very special feeling for what an important occasion it is for Muslim people. And since that time I've also been able to travel in different parts of the world where Islam is the primary religion. As a matter of fact, I had the opportunity to be in your homeland 3 years ago in Egypt and was received graciously. It was a wonderful country and a wonderful experience for me. Of course, for anyone, it's thrilling to see the Sphinx and the pyramid, but more importantly, the people of Egypt are very hospitable people, and I certainly enjoyed my stay there. This afternoon is an interesting presentation, I'm sure, from each of us. Anytime we look into the cultures, the approaches to life of other people, is fascinating for us. And this afternoon, thanks to the Muslim Student Association, we do have with us Dr. Jamal Badawi. And Dr. Badawi is president of the Islamic Information Foundation. He also is a professor of management and at present is teaching at St. Mary University in Canada. His topic this afternoon is the status of women in Islam, and I'm sure we will find his remarks fascinating, so I ask you to welcome him with me. Dr. Badawi.
This morning we went for prayer to our Islamic Center, which is located on College and Curtin. And there were some students, and they started asking Dr. Badawi some questions. So he changed his mind. He said, instead of giving a lecture, which he has prepared, I know he has already, he is going to answer most of your questions. What do you want to hear from him? That's the reason we have passed these beige papers around, and would like you to please write your questions, the questions you have in mind. I know either you came yourself or you were asked by a teacher or some friend. What kind of questions do you have for Dr. Badawi? Let's take just a few minutes, write the question, pass them to your right-hand side, and there are people who will collect them, and then Dr. Badawi is going to talk about those topics. Let's do it very quickly. In the meantime, while you are doing that, we have a very special person with us, and she is Dr. Marla Selvage, who is Director of Religious Studies, and she has been enlightening all the students here on this campus about religious education, and I will request her to come over and be with us on the stage also. Marla. Marla is going to help Dr. Badawi in sorting out the questions and arrange them in a way so that they can be presented nicely.
Just to make sure that it covers their questions.
Oh,
that makes it more organized, I think, in presentation.
So ask them questions right now.
I'm ready if you want me.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. I greet you all with the traditional Islamic greeting. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace, blessing, and mercy of God Almighty be with you. I am very thankful to you all and to the university for sponsoring this activity. But I just wanted to make a slight clarification about the format. What I suggested to Dr. Akhtar perhaps was to just ask you in the first few minutes to ask the kind of questions or issues that you would like to be covered. And then I have a prepared presentation already. My purpose for that exercise is to just find out whether the presentation prepared seem to match your needs or not, and try to adjust it while talking. I think that might combine the benefits of a totally loose question answer period in all directions and a just prepared text without keeping in mind your needs. Would that be satisfactory to everyone? I'm quite democratic. Sometimes I ask my students also in class to vote on what they prefer. How many of you prefer that approach, that we just listen to a few questions first from you to learn about your concern, and then go ahead with the formal presentation and come back to other questions that weren't covered, were not covered enough? How many of you, just by show of hands, prefer that format? Those opposed, abstention, motion passed.
Not ask questions that might be really important because
Okay.
they're afraid, and that's why the
Okay, and maybe that's why presentation might perhaps deal with that. But can we spend just a few minutes just to tell me, not detailed questions, just issues that you think need to be covered? Do we have a few courageous people just to start us off? Yes. Just brief question or topic. Okay. Okay. Okay, thank you. Other concerns? Just issues that you'd like to know about. There must be several. Yeah, maybe that's, yeah. So maybe perhaps there might be some benefit also of going through presentation anyway. All right. I'd like to divide the presentation actually into 5 basic issues. One is to deal with some introductory remarks and clarify my methodology of presentation. And then in the 4 other areas, we will deal with the position of women in Islam from the spiritual, economic, social, and political aspects. And within these titles, I try to incorporate as many questions that I have been exposed to you, from you, or from other audience in the past as possible. There are 6 basic areas that I'd like to start with by way of clarification of methodology. First one is to clearly distinguish between the normative teachings of Islam, what Islam teaches as a religion and a way of life, and the practices that are done by Muslims in diverse cultures in different ways. The two are not necessarily to be equated. The second point, that my focus here will be on the normative teaching of Islam. What does Islam teach with respect to women? And my purpose behind that is to use that as the criterion or yardstick according to which we can judge the appropriateness or lack of it of Muslim practices in various parts of the world. The third point, that even when we refer to the sources of Islam, we should make a distinction between what we call the primary sources of Islam and opinions, jurisprudential opinions by scholars. The 2 primary sources of Islam are the Quran, which Muslims believe to be the word of God dictated through Angel Gabriel to the last prophet, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and Sunnah or Hadith literature, which means the saying of the Prophet, which is also revealed in meaning, but the Prophet used his own words, unlike the Quran, and both are kept separately, but both are regarded as the 2 primary sources of Islam. Being primary and revelatory sources in nature, it means that they are definitive. But on the other hand, the opinions and interpretations of scholars throughout history, no matter how great they are, cannot be equated with the authority of these 2 primary sources. In some cases, there could be more than one opinion in a given issue. In some cases, one can point out to errors of interpretation. The 4th point, that even when we refer to the primary sources, the Quran and Hadith, we should try to understand them also in a way that is consistent with the proper methodology of interpretation. Namely, there are 3 issues to keep in mind in interpretation. 1, nothing can be interpreted out of context. And by context, we mean when you refer to one particular verse in the Quran, how does it relate to the whole thrust in the entire Quran? How does it relate to the whole thrust and purpose of the surah or chapter in which it occurs? And how does it relate also to the basic theme and thrust in the passage where this verse or that hadith happened to occur. A second point, which is very important in the case of the Quran, is to understand excuse me, the so-called reasons or occasions of revelation. Some verses in the Quran were revealed in response to a particular problem or question or issue, and some understanding of the background shed some light. And that's why it's not enough just to keep a translation of the Quran and read without delving deeper into under what conditions. Thirdly, that since the hadith also is the second primary source of Islam, one cannot interpret one verse in the Quran without referring to other sayings of the Prophet concerning the same topic, because it is in hadith literature that we find clarification, explanation, definition, and sometimes restriction of the meaning that otherwise could be mistaken if we don't take both sources at the same time. This might sound a little bit dry and methodological, but I think it's very important as we go on, and perhaps when we start addressing questions, you can see the relevance of this basic frame of mind. The way I chose then to deal with the topic, as I indicated earlier, would be to address position of women in Islam in 4 areas that seem to represent a spectrum of questions: the spiritual, the economic, the social, and the political. And let me begin with one at a time. On the spiritual aspect, there are 6 basic points that I would like to make briefly. 1. According to the Quran, the spiritual human nature of woman is exactly the same as man. I have a list of references here, so in order to save time, not make it laborious, I'd be glad to leave a copy here that has some verse numbers that you could obtain through the MSA. But the documentation is in the Quran. I'll just quote one for your convenience. In the beginning of Surah number 4, it says, "O mankind, be dutiful to your Lord who created you from one spirit," or soul, some translate it as soul, "and of like nature," or of it means of like nature, he created its mate or spouse. So the spiritual nature of men and women are exactly the same. And this is not the only reference, just for brevity I mentioned one. Number 2, according to the Quran, without any distinction between male and female, it indicates that all human beings, regardless of their religion or background or race, are recipients of a divine breath. It says that when God created Adam, or created any human being for that matter, نَفَخَ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِهِ, breathed into him something of his spirit. So every human being, male or female, has that distinction above all other creatures, the spirituality, the innate pure nature to reach for the Creator and to aspire for him. The third point is that the Quran speaks about male and female alike without distinction. Number 1, as dignified creatures, as we find in chapter 17, for example, verse 70, and speaks of both male and female also as being appointed by God as his trustees on this earth. Number 4, I hope you excuse my frequent coughing. In fact, I just recovered from a flu and I have some dry cough. And of course, without drinking while speaking because of fasting, it might be a little hard, so I hope you bear with me. My apology. In the Quran, we don't find any trace of blaming the female for the fall of man. There is no theory actually of fall of man in Islam as it's understood in other communities. Nor is there any indication that pregnancy and childbirth are a sort of punishment for women for encouraging Adam to eat from the forbidden tree. The Quran speaks about both Adam and Eve as equally guilty, as equally repentant, and equally forgiven. It is very interesting to give you a reference here in Surah or chapter 7 in the Quran, in verses 19 to 27, speaks about both of them on equal footing. There is no single verse in the entire Quran that point the finger to the female as having this responsibility or blame for it. Number 5, giving the same logic, the Quran indicates that the duties responsibilities, moral and otherwise, moral and legal, of male and female, as well as the consequences, spiritual or legal, are the same. 6, to conclude that section with a catch-all statement in the Quran, in chapter 49, in verse 13, it clearly states that there is no superiority of anyone over the other except by virtue of one thing, righteousness. That precludes male, female, black, white, east and western. The text of the verse actually says, O mankind, and notice here the address does not say, O Muslims. O mankind, all of you. We created you. God speaks, of course, in the royal language. We created you from a single pair of a male and a female, i.e., you're one family. You like it or not. Colors, ethnic groups or races, same parents. You're one family. And we made you into nations and tribes that you may get to know one another. There is no superiority. Like a bouquet of flower, a white flower is beautiful in its own right, so is the black, the yellow, the pink, but more beautiful is the array of the flowers in a nice bouquet. Nations and tribes that you may get to know one another. God could have created us all the same color, the same weight, stereotype. And then it goes on. Lo, the most honored of you in the sight of God is one who is more righteous. An objective criteria, not based on any of these false distinctions. Based on that verse, obviously, it doesn't say which one of you is more male or more female. That's the only and sole criterion for superiority or betterment of one human over the other. Moving on to the economic aspect. Here, I'll be briefer. I'll make only 2 basic points. One is that according to Islamic law, woman is entitled to have property, to own it, and to dispose of it in any way she likes, whether she is single or married. In fact, this compares curiously with the Married Women Property Act, a series of acts that were passed in Britain, and which was first among European countries in the 1860s, that for the first time recognized the right of married women to dispose of their property without the permission or control of their husbands. Islam accepted that right 1300 years before the first law in Europe to acknowledge that right. There is something related to that, and it is my hypothesis that perhaps the notion of wife taking the last name of the husband may somehow be connected with the notion of the husband controlling the finances of the family. In Islam, actually, a married woman may keep her maiden name, and this is the most common practice among the 1 billion Muslims. The most common practice is that a married woman keep her family name, her maiden name. She doesn't have to change that. But some women, of course, Muslim women in North America, for legal, insurance, and other policies, sometimes have to take the name of their husband. But otherwise, this is not a common practice among Muslims. A second basic point is that a female in Islam is assured, because of her femininity, because of the fact that sometimes she might be pregnant and unable to be in the workforce. Sometimes she may feel that her devotion to her young children might be more important than going to work for some period or stage in her life. So to give her assurance and financial security, we find that she's giving a number of privileges over man, and man is giving only one privilege over her. The only additional privilege financially that is given to man over woman is the variations in the share of inheritance. The share of inheritance. However, in return for this one, she's giving the following. 1, at the time of engagement, she is on the receiving side by way of gifts. 2, at the time of marriage, she is the sole recipient of the marital gift that the Quran speaks about and urges people to pay. Even though there is no minimum or maximum, a marital gift normally is consistent with the person's finances and ability, and as such it could be a substantial amount. That marital gift, unlike again cultural practices in some Muslim countries, is to be regarded as entirely the private property and security of the wife. She doesn't have to buy furniture. She doesn't have to give it to her father or brother. It is her free gift, and the Quran call it gift in Surah number 4. Gift, free gift. Number 3, in all stages of her life, the female is assured security and support, and she's never obliged to go in the workforce if she doesn't, unlike the male. That means that when she is a daughter, it is the responsibility of her father. If she's married, it is the responsibility of her husband. If she doesn't have either, it could be the responsibility of her son, working or earning son, or it could be a close relative, depending, of course, on the degrees of closeness. But she's always assured that she can never be forced to work against her will, that she's always assured. That's not the case for the male. Number 4, in addition to having her property prior to marriage transferring fully to her right and control, anything that she earns during her marital life is to be regarded as entirely hers. Whether this is income on investment of her property, or if she works with the consensus of her husband, if she works and earns money, even her salary is entirely hers. She is not responsible to spend a penny on the household against her will, either in support, housing, in anything. And still the husband is responsible for maintaining her, providing food, clothing, and housing, and everything that she needs. So it's entirely her own security. 6, if divorce takes place, the Muslim woman is guaranteed support, full support during a waiting period, even after divorce is uttered. The waiting period could vary somewhere between 3 months. It could be 9 months if she's pregnant, because the waiting period ends only with the delivery of the baby. 7, even after the delivery of the baby, if she had one, the husband would have to pay her for suckling her own baby even. That means to provide for support for her during the suckling period, if they have mutual agreement on the amount of support that is needed. 7, regardless, she is entitled for child support for the time that the child is in her custody. Well, 7 for 1. Coming to the third part of the topic, which I'll spend a little more time because of its importance, and that's the social position of women. In addressing this, I'd like to cover it in 5 sub-areas. 1, her position as a daughter. 2, as a wife. 3, as a mother. 4, as simply a sister in faith. And 5thly, touching briefly on the issue of modesty in dress and behavior. As a daughter, 4 basic points are relevant here. 1, prior to the coming of Islam and the birth of Prophet, or the mission of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, some of the Arab tribes used to practice what is called female infanticide, burying girls, baby girls, alive. Such a cruel practice has been explained in a variety of motives, whether the fear of shame or economic reasons because girls cannot work and produce income for the family, or sheer male chauvinism. Regardless of the reasons, there is one fact that is quite clear and documented in the Quran, that is in chapter 81, verses 8 and 9, that this is nothing but a murder. And the Quran forbade it, and actually in reality, in historical reality, that cruel practice ended with the advent of Islam. Number 1. Number 2, the Quran went further than that even to rebuke those parents who used to feel very happy when the news comes to them that the baby born to them is a boy, but feel grim when it is a girl. Even that feeling itself, or grimness, without even killing the daughter, was condemned in the Quran, as we see in chapter 16, verses 58 and 59. 3, in numerous references in the Quran and the teaching of Prophet Muhammad, he indicated that the parents are duty-bound to properly upbring their daughters, to treat them kindly, and also not to make distinction between boys and girls. This appears specifically in hadith, not to distinguish or put their boys ahead of the girls in terms of treatment and rights. In fact, one of the touching sayings of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that he said, if one of you has been blessed or given 2 daughters, and he did not bury them alive, did not insult them, and brought them up kindly and rightly, he and I will come in the day of judgment that is in paradise like this. And he pointed with his finger, that he will be as close to me as these fingers are to each other. Fourthly, when it comes to the matter of education, and unlike of the practices of some ignorant Muslims in various parts of the world or various points of history, education is regarded, according to normative Islam, not only as a right, but a responsibility and duty of every male and female. One of the sayings of the Prophet is that seeking knowledge is mandatory on every Muslim. And the term Muslim is used generically, the same way you say Jew or Christian, that means all, male and female. The second sub-area, her position as a wife. 5 basic points here. 1, according to the Quran, and this is a key citation in chapter 30, verse 21. It clearly indicates that the basis of marriage is tranquility, and that it is established on love and compassion. I think this verse was recited earlier, of his signs, of the signs of God's mercy and wisdom, is that he created for you from your same nature, anfusikum, same nature, of like nature, spouses, that you may find peace and tranquility in them, and he ordained between you love and compassion. Mawaddatan wa rahmah, love and compassion. These are the basis for marriage in Islam. This Quranic command has been echoed quite frequently by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when he said in one saying that the best of you are the best in conduct, or the most perfect believers are those who are best in conduct, and the best of you are the best to their families or to their wives. And he made a claim that I'm sure very few husbands can dare claim it with confidence. He said, and I am the best of you to my family. I am the best of you to my family. And that, of course, statements could have been easily checked by his wife or wives in the period of polygamy or polygyny. The third aspect, or second aspect, about her position as a wife is her right to accept or reject marital proposals. There was an incident in the lifetime of the Prophet where a father pressured his girl to marry someone because he's, noble or coming from a good stock. And she came to complain to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet said, if you like, I can revoke that marriage. The girl answered something to the effect, I happen to like the guy, but I came here to ask you so that other parents know that they cannot force their daughters to marry against their will. And that 1400 years ago. Thirdly, the husband's responsibility for maintenance, protection, and overall headship or leadership of the family, which is known as qiwama in Islamic terminology, does not preclude also what the Quran elsewhere say about consultation in general as a principle ruling the life of the Muslim community, and more particularly even consultation between husband and wife, even in such matters as weaning the child. Some of the references to this include chapter 2, verse 233, chapter 4, verse 19, and these two. Number 4, handling marital disputes, if they occur, first privately, between husband and wife. There are steps for that, but I emphasize, within the basic methodology mentioned earlier, without excesses and without cruelty. Then if it doesn't work, mediation can take place. If it doesn't work, Islam allows but not encourages divorce as the last resort when things are not workable and people are likely to suffer for the rest of their lives. Fifthly, the question of dissolution of marriage. There is a great myth that I've seen in popular books and magazine articles and newspaper reports in North America that only man in Islam or the male has the right to divorce. Nothing is farther from the truth. There are a number of ways, legitimate ways according to Islamic Sharia or law for dissolution of marriage. 1, mutual agreement between husband and wife. 2, unilateral decision made by the husband. 3, unilateral decision made by the wife if she negotiates that condition as part of her marital contract. 4, intervention by a court when a wife, for example, is abused or not supported or other reasons, other legitimate reasons, and she goes to the court and the husband refused to divorce, he would be forced to divorce her with full rights. 5th, there is even a method of dissolution of marriage on the own initiative of the wife without the approval or necessarily acceptance of the husband, and without even the intervention of the court, and without having that condition even negotiated in the contract, and that is known as khul' or divestiture. There have been already cases at the time of the Prophet when a woman came to him and she said, look, I am married to my husband and I'm not complaining of anything wrong that he did. As a person, he's a good person, he treats me well, he's a pious person, I have no objection. But I cannot stand living with him. In other words, there's some deep lack of, match. Chemistry is not working, even though she tried. And she said, I hate to do something wrong, and I want really to get out of that marriage. Here is a case where she doesn't have that in her contract. There is no legal ground in court because there is no insult, there is no abuse, there is no lack of support. He's doing all his duties. And in spite of all of that, the Prophet said to him, to the man, said to her first, are you willing to return him the marital gift that he gave to you? Of course, that's only fair because, a woman cannot marry a person, get a substantial marital gift, and say, okay, you're okay, but I want out and keep the money. That's not fair to him either. So he said, are you willing to return back to him the marital gift, which was in that case an urshar? She said, yes, waziyada, more. And he said, no more. And he told the man, خذ الحديقة وطلقها تطليقا. It's a very well-known text. Take the urshar from her and grant her divorce. The man didn't want to divorce, but he had to do it. So the notion that only man can divorce in Islam is not really correct. But I must also say that divorce is not a privilege. It's something really as a last resort. We should not say it's a privilege, but at least in terms of way out of unhappy marriage, it is there. Now, coming to the sub-issue under wife, which is very common, the question of polygyny. I'm not saying polygamy because, polygamy includes polyandry, which means multiple husbands for the same wife, which we know that historically speaking has been very, very rare because it doesn't seem to go with the female nature. But it includes also under the definition of polygamy, that's the more correct term, polygyny, which means a husband married to more than one wife. And here I'd like to clarify 5 points in brief because that could be a big topic by itself, but just give 5 points as a sort of enticement for you to ask questions. Number 1, it is a mistaken view, but common, that the norm in Islam is polygamy. I remember when I came to the United States to make my graduate studies first in 1963 in Indiana University, and some of my American friends asked me, what religion are you? I said, I am a Muslim. Next question, how many wives do you have? So a typical stereotype Muslim is one who is married to 4 wives. I say monogamy is the rule in Islam because demographically speaking, even it is impossible for every man to have, or majority of men to have 4 wives. You need a population of 80% females and 20% males to do that. Not even 2 wives, because that means 2/3 female and 1/3 male. And statistics in numerous countries, with some exceptions, and globally, on the world at large, show that the number of male and female are almost equal, but female has the edge with maybe 1 to 3 percentage point, depending on the country, and globally also. There are more females than male, but it's not really 2 to 1. There could be slight variations, which obviously indicate that demographically speaking, it's impossible to speak of polygamy or polygyny as a norm. Definitely monogamy in Islam also in the norm, in the same it is in Christianity or Judaism. And speaking of Christianity and Judaism, let us remember also, just for the sake of people who might wonder, is polygyny moral? That many of the Israelite prophets, some of the greatest figures, even the friend of God, Abraham, had more than one wife. Some prophets like David and Solomon are said to have large number of wives. But sometimes we mistaken also some of the reasons why some of these prophets married more than one wife. We tend to think of it only as pleasure, but in fact the position of prophets, especially in tribal societies, makes the marriage or marrying daughters of people or sisters of people from different tribes is very sound for uniting people, reducing the enmity and saving blood that could be shed because of this. It did work in the past for all prophets actually to try to unify people rather than simply the typical notion of having more than wives, just to keep jumping from one to the other. The second point about polygyny is that when Islam even permitted or allowed polygyny, it did not invent it. Polygyny was practiced not only by pagan Arabs before Islam, it was practiced by the Jewish people until the 12th century. Even some great Christians like Martin Luther said that the Lord did not forbid it. He could not find anything in the Bible, that is even in the quote-unquote New Testament, that is definitively prohibiting of polygyny. And actually he said that even the friend of God had more than one wife. So it did exist in practice of many people. It did exist among Jews and in some cases among Christians. In fact, I give you a reference even of the practice of polygyny among Christians, or by the approval of the Christian church. This is a 2-volume excellent work, classic work in anthropology by Edward Westermarck, M-A-R-C-K, and it's called History of Human Marriage, and he gives full documentation of these matters. But what I'm saying that polygyny, some people connected with Islam, you say, all right, Christianity, monogamous. Judaism, monogamous. Islam, polygynous. This is a very mistaken notion. Polygyny was already there. Islam actually limited its practice in terms of number of wives. People used to marry any number they want. It limited to maximum of 4. Not only this, but it even provided more controls and rigid requirements in terms of supporting the wives, doing justice to them, and ability also to be able to support them. The third aspect is that, getting back to the methodology suggesting earlier, if you examine the occasion of revelation and the context in which that verse appears in the Quran, you could easily conclude that the spirit of the law is that monogamy is to be encouraged, but polygyny should be regarded as an exception to deal with contingencies on the individual or collective levels. The only verse in the Quran that spoke about polygyny, that it's permitted and limited it, was revealed after the famous Battle of Uhud, in which a large number of Muslims were martyred when the pagan Arabs attacked them, leaving behind widows, leaving behind children, not only widows, children of those widows who needed a father's figure, needed support, needed something more than a humiliating internment in some house or home for the orphans or for the widows. They needed the warmth of a home. It is in that context that the verse was revealed in Quran, shedding some light that one should not abuse it or use it for other than what it is intended to, even though it is not spelled out as an absolute requirement in the law. In fact, when we speak about collective reasons, it is not something of the past or the 20th century alone. Actually, at all times, they have always been circumstances like destructive wars, in which most casualties, even though casualties go across the board, most casualties are on the male side. I'll give you one simple contemporary example of Afghanistan. During the cruel Russian genocide committed against the Afghani people, you would be surprised to know that nearly 1 to 1.5 million people were killed in a country which is only about 25 million. About 20 million, actually. It's close to 20 rather than 25. Well, with this proportion, it became very disproportionate because most of this 1.5 million are men. And men in the marriageable age. I mean, men in their full strength, not the very old or not the very young. That made or created a great deal of imbalance between the numbers of males and females, and also scuttled the opportunity of younger girls who are coming to marital age to find husbands, because there isn't enough. What is wrong in that case of a person looking after one or more widow and her orphan children? So actually there's a lot of humanitarian, a lot of people think of polygyny as a privilege for men, but objectively speaking, not many people try to look as to what benefit could accrue to some women actually as a result of practice of polygyny whenever the need arises, and whether that solution is more moral, more practical, more humane than any other alternative solution that you could think of, especially in view of the insistence in Islam on chastity and maintaining everybody's needs without having to resort to something illicit. Number 4, even in the practice of polygyny, nobody is forced into that, and all parties involved, all parties have options. The husband have an option of remaining monogamous or marrying a second wife. The second wife has the option and cannot be deceived, should not be deceived. If she accepts and finds it to her interest to be married even as a second wife to a man rather than remaining spinster for the rest of her life, it is up to her. Nobody forces her. And we said earlier that marriage requires consent of both sides. The first wife, if she cannot take that situation, if the husband does any injustice to her by favoring the new wife, she can ask for divorce in the court with full rights as a divorcee. If she can't, then she has also the khul, or divestiture, that we spoke about, by simply getting out of that marriage. Everybody still has some option, even in the case of polygyny. Finally, I just conclude with one remark that oftentimes we, and by we say everybody, you and me and everyone else, sometimes tend to be ethnocentric. We try to examine a particular practice in view of the common views or values in a given culture, and try to come up with a hasty judgment that unless everybody, everywhere, at all points of history, past, present, and future, agrees with us, it must be wrong and abhorrible. And that's ethnocentrism, what I call. Who are we to say that for all parts of the world, in all points of history, under all circumstances, polygyny is a terrible thing and can never be regarded as a valid or better solution for some circumstances? Who are we to say that? Even from, if you take it from, not from the religious, from the purely anthropological or even sociological standpoint, no sociologist or anthropologist can make this kind of serious generalization to apply to everyone. If it works for some communities and provide more humane solution to their problems, who are we to, classify it as something terrible? And sometimes you might fall into double standards, at least from an Islamic standpoint. It's regarded as double standards, whereby in some cultures a person who might be married only to one wife, strictly monogamous in law, because of course if you have another wife legally, of course you're in trouble, okay? That's bigamy and it's against the law. So the law cannot tolerate a person being legally married to another woman with full rights, with full protection, with documentation that entitles her to inheritance and all other rights. Yet in the same society that or community or culture that sees polygyny as a terrible thing, there is a great deal of tolerance, at least among many, of the same monogamous, quote-unquote, legally monogamous man to have 10 other sweethearts. So we tolerate that. We don't say we approve it. We tolerate it, yet to have a second wife with all protection for her and her children is regarded as something abhorrent. This is, like I say, give an example just to try to avoid being ethnocentric in one situation or the other. Coming to the third sub-area under social as a mother, 2 basic points. One is that according to the Quran, especially in chapter 17, verse 23, kindness to parents comes immediately after worship of God. In other words, a human being has, number 1, duty to worship God, the one God of all, number 1. Number 2, to be kind to parents. But more amazingly, in chapter 31, verse 14, after it speaks even about kindness to parents, it specifies mother, especially the mother, and give the reason why, because she's gone through the tribulation of pregnancy and childbirth. A second basic point is that in the Quran and in numerous sayings or hadith of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he gave a special place to to mothers. I'll give you one weaker, in terms of authenticity, one weaker source and a stronger one. The weaker one is that paradise is at the feet of mothers. Paradise is at the feet of mothers. He didn't say on the head of mothers or cheek of mothers, at the feet of mothers, in terms of adoration and respect. But the other one, which is a stronger narration, is a beautiful one. It says that one man came to Prophet Muhammad and asked him, who among all people, relatives, non-relatives, everyone, is most worthy of my kindness and support and love? So the Prophet said, your mother. He said, who's next? The Prophet said, your mother. Number 2. He said, yes. Who's next after my mother? He said, your mother. He said, yes. Who's next? The Prophet said, and your father. 75% of the kindness to the mother, 25% for the father. Eat your heart out, fathers. But to put it in my preferred way, in Olympic terms, gold medal for the mother, silver medal for the mother, bronze medal for the mother, for the father, maybe a consolation certificate. The 4th sub-area. Suppose even a woman is not a daughter, wife, or mother. How is the Muslim supposed to relate to other women? In that, 2 basic points. 1, in one of the key saying of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he says women are, and he uses an Arabic term that has 2 related meanings, 2 shades of meaning. Both are correct. Shaqa'iq in Arabic. And shaqa'iq would mean that women are but sisters of men, from shaqiq. Or shaqa'iq from shaq means half. Women are like the halves. Like men are half, women are half. So you get 2 halves. You can say, let me look at the bigger half or a smaller half. A half is a half. The second point is that the Prophet was very sensitive to the feelings of women, and he very frequently emphasized their kind treatment. Oftentimes he condemned those, for example, who abuse their wives or are cruel in their treatment of their wives. The final sub-area in social, the 5th point, some people might have some curiosity about why Muslim women dress the way they do, or at least majority of some Muslim women. Is it something that is imposed on them? Some chauvinistic people and males in their family tell them to do that? Or is it just a product of a particular culture? Why do they have to do that? And some people even ask questions pertaining to the seclusion that they see in some Muslim countries and isolation of women from the public life of the community. No, I'm not saying here that the role of woman in Islam as a mother and wife, that it takes primacy over any other contribution. There's no question about that. This is quite clear from the text of the Quran and the teaching of the Prophet. But to go far in terms of isolating women as if they do not exist or marginalize their role in society, and as it is in many Muslim countries or sub-areas in Muslim countries, it's a question that I'm sure in the mind of many of you, if you have read it right, or at least based on previous experience of questions like this. So I thought I could respond to that issue in 4 brief points also. 1, I must say in all honesty that there is a great deal of variation in the practices of Muslims in different Muslim countries. In some countries you find that women are able to contribute to society much greater than others. There's a big difference of participation of Muslim women in Egypt, for example, in the parliament and other places. In some countries even in ministerial positions. And the obvious absence of women from any considerable say or influence on political or social affairs in some other countries where the culture is very closed and very conservative. So to generalize about the Muslim world is a very big mistake. You see, Muslims constitute 1 of every 5 human beings is a Muslim. 1 billion or so around the world, in dozens and dozens of countries. There is nearly 46 countries which are majority Muslims only, let alone countries which has a substantial minority of Muslims. So generalizations are very, very inaccurate when we describe. So there are variations, but to me, it's not confusing at all. Because to me, I can easily see that there is a big gap between the real and ideal, between the normative and what you can find actually, descriptive aspect of what is going on in Muslim countries. Okay? So that is something we have to keep in mind in order not to fall into the mistakes made by some people who just, see something or read something of practices in a given place and start to generalize, oh, they do that because their religion is Islam. It could be contrary to Islam. It could be also imitation of other cultures that has nothing to do with Islam. The second point, as far as the dress is concerned, there are basic parameters that are provided for in the Quran and the teaching of the Prophet that are, in the methodological term, definitive in terms of its revelatory source. But these are basic guidelines, and they have certain legitimate aims behind them. The time doesn't allow it, but for a practicing Muslim woman, if I ask my daughter or my wife, they say, I'm doing that because this is what God wants me to do it. I obey Him. I love God. This is my choice. It's not necessarily that somebody is forcing or twisting. It is not even cultural, because how do you explain the fact that in North America and Europe today, there are thousands, and I'm not exaggerating, there are thousands of women, American women, Canadian women, German women, who did not immigrate from any Muslim country. They were like Britishers or Americans in their origin. And then they accept Islam and they observe the same basic parameters also in their dress. How could we say it's because they emerged in a culture that observed that? American culture doesn't observe that. So there's a big mistake made by many writers when they try to conclude or jump to some explanation of observation of this attire. It goes back to the commitment of an individual Muslim lady, at least in the normal state of affairs. Thirdly, that these parameters, I emphasize again, as seen by a committed Muslim woman as divinely based guidelines with a wisdom behind them. And if she's able to find or discern some aspect of that divine wisdom, fine. If not, she still do it. And this is not my words as a male, in fact. I talk to my wife, talk to any of my daughters. This is exactly how they feel about it. Number 4, that the notion of seclusion of women is totally alien to the prophetic period. And there are some scholars who have fallen into some interpretation problem that I cannot detail now. But if you examine the early practice of early Muslims at the time of the Prophet, you find that Muslim women were fully and totally involved in the affairs within the basic parameters of decency that is required. Coming now to the final section, the legal and political aspects of women's position in Islam. And here there are 5 basic points. 1, that there is a fundamental equality before the law and before the courts of law, with the purpose of doing justice to all parties involved. I'm using very capsulized terms that carries a lot of meaning, but just for brevity, I leave it at that. Number 2, the variations in witness in court appear in the Quran in the context only of financial contracts. And to ascertain, the purpose is to ascertain accuracy of the witness that is given, provided a particular setting or cultural norms whereby women may not be as exposed or experienced in financial matters, and as such a possibility of confusion in the witness may arise. But I must add to this, however, that a basic rule in Islamic law that a judge would have to resort to any means, any legitimate means, to ascertain justice. And as such, within Sharia, within Islamic law, this matter of variations in witness in that particular area between men and women is not necessarily a creedal issue that nobody can touch, but as jurists said, a judge may evaluate a given situation or case, and if he is convinced that the woman or man giving witness are credible and knowledgeable of what they're speaking about, he is allowed to take that as evidence in the case. Number 2, the general rule in terms of political life is participation and collaboration. In fact, one key verse in the Quran appears in chapter 9 in verse 17, which basically translates, the believing men and women are helpers, supporters, collaborators. These are all meanings of awliya, of one another. And then it goes on to describe their behavior and their supporting each other in doing what is good and avoiding what is evil. Number 4, I came to it already, there is historical evidence of participation of Muslim women in the choice of rulers, what we call today election, in public issues, in lawmaking, even at the time of Umar after the Prophet, in lawmaking or objecting to laws presented before the assembly, in administrative positions, in scholarship and teaching, and in the battlefield. In fact, I'll give you two examples. One, the most authentic collection of Prophet saying is known as the collection by Al-Bukhari, which is all sound and very meticulously confirmed and authenticated hadith. And in that book, there is a whole chapter about participation of Muslim women in the battlefield. The second example, take Aisha, the wife of the Prophet. One of the great early Muslim jurists by the name Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, very well known, top jurist, once was quoted as saying that when we means jurists, not common people, when we, top jurists, have a dispute or difference on one legal issue, we used to go to Aisha, the wife of the Prophet after his death, and ask her, and we always found that she's got knowledge of that. That means she was a professor of professors, as we call it today. She was an authority in her own rights. Some scholars point out that in the biography of early Muslim jurists, even in one madhab it was reported there are hundreds of prominent Muslim women jurists whose opinions were quite respected and accepted. Number 5, there is no text that I know of in the Quran, the two primary sources, that restrict women from any position of leadership, political or otherwise, except for two cases. One is leading prayers, and the reason behind that is that prayer in Islam has a particular format which involves prostration to the ground, hands and knees on the ground. And obviously a woman standing in front and bowing hands and knees will not feel very comfortable with men praying behind her. However, some of you might be interested to know that even that has some exception. And it was narrated in hadith also that there was one instance of a Muslim woman who memorized the Quran better, and she led the prayer in her own household of people, including males, but she prayed behind so that she doesn't bow in front of them, but she was the leader of the prayer in the row behind the males. The other exception is also based on interpretation. There is more than one interpretation. On one hadith or saying of the Prophet, which was understood by some to mean that it is not proper to push women to be the head of the state. But no other hadith deals specifically with any other position, like ministerial position, being prime minister or being judge. There is no text as such that deal with that. It's simply the headship of the state. And even that hadith has been interpreted in a variety of ways, the most common of which is that it is not appropriate, but there are others who challenge, even minority scholars who challenge that interpretation. But I must emphasize, even that issue of being head of a government does not fall within what you might call creedal text in the Quran that you cannot deviate an iota from. One evidence in question that one of the great scholars of our times, Maulana Maududi of Pakistan, a prolific writer and scholar who died a few years back, he's known actually to be a more conservative scholar even. And at one point in Pakistan, a woman by the name of Fatima Janah, the sister of the founder of modern Pakistan, was running an election against a dictator, Ayub Khan. And Maulana Maududi actually came in support of Fatima Janah. And he accepted the possibility that she would be a head of the state. And he's a very conservative scholar and knowledgeable scholar for that matter. Had he understood the hadith to me, a creedal issue that is subject to absolutely no objection or no exception, he would have not violated that and came up with this support. So there are also even issues on a scholarly level. I'm not talking public opinions of Muslims. On a scholastic level, it is not really that simple issue even in that level. I'll conclude with 2 points. One, that the text from the primary sources, textual, historical, or early model realities are often disregarded sometimes by Muslim individuals, by Muslim communities or societies, and by Muslim governments, including the governments that claim to apply Islam in their countries. Let's face it honestly. 2, that there is a definite need to purify both the understanding and action of Muslims in modern times, to get it back as close as possible to the norm, the role model of the Prophet and his companion, and to avoid being enslaved to cultural practices coming from outside of the Muslim world or cultural practices even inside the Muslim world. I thank you very much for your patience, and again I end by peace and blessings and mercy of God invoked for all of you. Thank you.
We have some wonderful questions. There's a great audience.
I hope my
And there's one question that you want to bring up here. Before I say this, I want to say that these are not hostile questions. These are questions of people that are interested. Okay. You spoke about women and the importance of women within the Quran.
Yes.
In fact, you talked about Aisha. Was it
Aisha.
Yeah. We all know, or many of us know about Khadija, the wife of the Prophet.
Yes.
And the mothers of the Prophet really wrote down the message. Can you hear me?
No.
Okay. We know.
It's for recording.
They're more important than your recording.
You mean perhaps Hafsa, who had the custody of the original manuscript of the Quran? No. Yeah. You're welcome to share that with me.
Okay. All right, I will. Okay. We know that the wife of the Prophet was Khadija, and the Prophet Muhammad was illiterate and could not write. And Khadija wrote down many of his sayings. And one of the questions that we have from the audience today that is very good is, are there any women prophets in Islam today? And I guess I'd like to add, why aren't there any women imams in Islam today?
Thank you very much. It's a very good question. Okay. Well, first of all, just by way of clarification about the preservation of the Quran. The Quran was preserved simultaneously in two ways. One is memorization by the masses around the Prophet as they heard the Quran directly from his mouth. And secondly, by writing. And there is authentic reference of many scribes of revelation who kept record of every verse that the Prophet uttered. As far as the whether there is any woman prophet, no, there is no reference to prophet in a sense of messenger of the magnitude, for example, of Abraham, Moses, Jesus, or Muhammad, people who really faced their people and their corruption and suffered as a result of conveying the message. But I can give you my humble interpretation of that. Given the fact that the Quran speaks about women and men being both on the same spiritual plane, there must be a different reason why there was no woman messenger. Prophet, there are lots of prophets, I'll come to that also. Woman messenger, one who's really in charge of carrying the message and encountering hostility from the people. I'll give you one example of this. Take the case of Prophet Muhammad, and that's typical of previous prophets. When he once went to a city known as At-Ta'if, it still has that name in Saudi Arabia today, in order to invite people to Islam. You know what happened to him? They started cursing him, abusing him, and they sent children and lunatic people to pelt him with stones to the point that his body and his feet were profusely bleeding. It is the time when he prayed, "Oh God, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing," same as other prophets before him said that. So the question here is this: when you face that, and sometimes when he's praying, they pour dirt over his head. So he was subjected, and his companions, to all kind of even physical abuse. Now, if a woman is put into that position, even if she is spiritually qualified, and definitely she qualifies spiritually, because of her femininity, suppose she's pregnant even at the time, to put her in that harsh type of environment is something that perhaps might not be very kind to her in that respect. So it's not a question of deprivation, but the nature and suffering of the Prophet. But when you speak about prophet, because the term prophet sometimes is understood also in the biblical context in a slightly different way from the Islamic. If you mean by prophet, for example, some inspired person, then there are definitely many inspired women who are highly praised before Islam and after Islam. Actually, one time Prophet Muhammad was quoted as saying, he said, my companions, that he means a companion, men and women, people who are his contemporary, his followers, are equivalent, that is in value and status, to the prophets of the Israelites. So when you use the term prophet in a sense of inspired, highly spiritual woman, then according by the text of the saying or hadith of the prophet, women also are in that category, but not in the category of encountering this physical insult or suffering for the message. The second question is about a woman imam. Or I think the question comes perhaps from the backdrop of the contemporary argument within the Christian and Jewish communities about women being ordained, I suppose. But let me clarify that the comparison here is not very accurate with Islam. The reason being is that in Islam there is no clergy, with the exception of the Shiite tradition, which is about 10% of Muslim world. The 90% of the Muslims believe that there should be no church in a sense of institution, not a building. There should be no clergy as such, with some people who are religious people. They could be scholars, they could be people leading prayer, but not clergy who are to be ordained in the normal sense, going through certain seminaries. Secondly, in the North American context, when you speak about a clergy, Jewish or Christian, you talk about a number of functions that they do. One of these is what? Teaching, preaching, counseling, and as one aspect, one element is what? Supervising or leading prayers, like, for example, applying communion or something, if the Catholic Church happens to accept that. Okay? Now, all of these functions are permissible for a Muslim woman, except for one thing, which is leading the prayer. And the reason, again, like I said earlier, Muslim prayer is different. There is bowing, there is prostration, and even then we find exception from sound hadith, that even in some cases women led the prayer. So if you look at the essence of the duty of a priest, it is not exactly like an imam in that sense, and in that sense she performs, and she's allowed to perform all these roles.
We're going to have one more question. I just want to relate that I was in Egypt and at prayers at a mosque in Egypt, and a lot of the fellows wore long skirts, and they prostrated themselves in front of me. So that argument about prostrating and being in front of someone doesn't always hold water, especially with the kind of clothes people wear in different countries.
Maybe one additional clarification might make it. Actually, the proper way of using the mosque, according to the instruction of the Prophet, is that when you come to mosque, suppose you have that big hall, he said that men should begin to file from the first rows backward, and women should begin from the back row so that their backs would be to the wall or to themselves, not to men. Start from the back row, moving forward. And the children in the middle, as I call them, a buffer zone. So there is a buffer zone. Of course, oftentimes, except in big congregations, you're not likely to fill the whole mosque, which means that while everybody is participating and can see the prayer and the leader of the prayer, in all likelihood, there will be some distance. So the men are encouraged to move forward. Women are in the back, so there's some distance in the middle, let alone also rows of children that could also be in the middle. So even then, there's no problem with men's skirts.
Okay. Here's one last question from the audience, and I'm sorry that we don't have a lot more. I think we're going to open it up for a couple more questions before we end today. The Quran, in several verses, well, at least in one verse that I know, says that it's all right to beat a woman in order to bring her into contrition so that she will obey her husband. Okay, here's a question from one of the audience. How would you explain or justify the publicized cases where American women married to Islamic men were held against their will in the husband's native country, and the husband justifies his behavior with the Holy Quran?
Okay. Well, as far as the second part, it's very simple and easy to answer. I stated several times that the criterion for what is right and what is wrong, what Islam teaches and what it doesn't teach, is not what somebody practices, is not what somebody is doing claiming to justify their deeds, that it is in the Quran. After all, we know in our history that there are some religious leaders even who stimulated wars and led crusades. I'm sure all true Christians would not necessarily agree with Pope Urban when he said, for Christ, let's go and kill those Muslims. So even if somebody claims relevance of their behavior from scriptures, there is a great deal of abuse of scripture to justify personal agenda. So the second part is very simple, and I address that in more than one occasion. So I wouldn't care what somebody is doing or what he claims. That does not show it. That does not say that in the Quran. So any abuse of that nature is not there. Secondly, on the question of quote unquote beating women, I go back again to the proper methodology. And remember, what did we say about methodology in the first place? I'm just trying to be consistent throughout. And this is part of addressing issues in an objective rather than emotional way. Okay, just to remind you, we said that when we interpret the basic sources of Islam, basic text, there are three things. I said number one, you have to look at the context of the Quran as a whole, of the chapter and of the passage when this particular issue arises. Number two, to remind you, what? To look into the occasion of revelation that might shed light as to how we properly understand that text. Number three is not to separate the Quran from Hadith, because both are revelatory source, and sometimes if you take one verse in the Quran without finding the qualifiers and restrictive meaning and usage in Hadith, then you can come up with a very erroneous conclusion. As I suggested this methodology, I'll bind myself and respect those methodology and follow in answering that question in that order. First of all, what is the context where this verse appears? First of all, what is the general context of the Quran in dealing with women? I have given already probably dozens, and I have more, of verses in the Quran about respect of women, adoring women, whether they are wives or their children, and what I quoted was more than enough. It follows then that if this is the general thrust of the Quran, one cannot only see one particular text and say that negates everything. That would not, even scholarly speaking, be correct, because it has to be understood in the light of others. In other words, if you have 90 texts, 99 texts, you have one text that sounds a little different or strange to understand. You don't say, all right, I understand the 99 in the light of the one, but you say, I understand the one in the light of the 99. Does that sound like a reasonable and objective approach? Then you go on to the context of the surah itself. The surah is called Women. And in that surah, again, you find that the overwhelming theme there is the protection of the right of women, which was a big leap, really, compared to what they were and what some women are today. That's the context. And read the surah yourself. Talk about the rights of women, the treatment of women, and so on. That appears. So the thrust, again, seems to be in the same positive direction. Then the third context. I said the Quran, the surah, and the passage in which it appears. The passage in which that text that has been grossly sometimes mistranslated is basically deals with marital disputes. And this is something I didn't brush aside. Remember when I spoke about marital disputes, what did I say? Anybody remember? I said marital disputes are to be resolved first within the privacy between husband and wife, and remember the qualifier, without excesses and cruelty. I didn't have time to detail it. I said there are steps. I mentioned even there are steps. Secondly, through mediation of the families, and then if need be, as the last resort, the most hated act, which is divorce. So follow the same kind of thing. It deals with family disputes. And the verse actually basically deals with the case which is called likarkitrans, or the case of a woman or wife whose husband, assuming his husband, is fulfilling all his duty, treating her properly, supporting her, being very cooperative and kind, but like some women and some men are, she's totally unreasonable, totally disrespectful, and uncooperative. The question here is what to do in a case like that. Are you going to allow that situation to continue with complete breakdown of discipline or cooperation within the family, and what impact would that have on the children? The Quran addresses issues rather than going around them. It addressed it right on. It says, those women that you fear their recalcitrance or rebellion, not rebellion again in the sense that some people might understand that he told her, cook me this, and she didn't cook it. You're really talking about extreme cases of unreasonableness. What to do with a wife like that? Since divorce is the final and ultimate solution, which is least desirable, the Quran said, عِظُوهُنْ. Like I say, some people don't even read the full verse. The verse did not begin by saying beat them. It says عِظُوهُنْ, means exhort them. which means talk to them, talk over with them. And there is no restriction in Islamic law as to how long that talk might take. You can be patient 1 day, 2 days, 1 week, 2 weeks, so long as you're feeling that you're somehow able to communicate, try to resolve the problem by appealing to your relationship to reasonable. Now, I think it is my judgment, and I suppose yours, is that the great majority of women, even if they have been unreasonable, would be sensitive enough to respond to a kind appeal to reform their kind of behavior. But like men, there would be some women, and I'm sure you know, men and women of that caliber, who are very unreasonable, are not very educated, are in places which are not very cultured, and somehow they refuse, even after you do that. Then the Quran did not even jump to conclusion and say, all right, you can use any physical force. It says, وَهْجُرُوهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ, which means depart with them in bed. Don't leave the house, but when you sleep, sleep separately. Suspend, in other words, the close and intimate marital relationship. And of course, God knows the nature of the female. If she feels that her husband is so upset that to the point even that he doesn't sleep with her, she might get a signal that the matter is really serious and something needs to be reformed. Now, even that minority who are unreasonable, most of them perhaps would respond at that second stage. But the Quran is not revealed only for the more cultured and the highly educated and sophisticated. It's revealed also to meet the needs of all cultures in all times with different levels of civility. And I'm sure you know, there are cases of people, men and women alike, who are so unreasonable and so irrational in their behavior that they try to damage their life by themselves, that even these two steps do not suit. Here you have one of two cases. If you know that this is the end of the road, there is no need to resort to any other step. Divorce might be in offing. But there may be cases where this is a very radical solution that would hurt her and hurt her children. And one final attempt could be tried. This is what I might call, if you look at it carefully, some people might think I'm belittling this or trivializing it. It's actually something that we call today some gentle shock therapy. Really. Because it says beat, and beat them lightly. Like I said earlier, one of the conditions of interpretation is to see what hadith or saying of the Prophet said in qualifying this. First of all, he said, you can never beat a person, whether a wife or child or anyone else or a man, on the face, because slapping the face is an insult, not correction. And God has dignified the human, should not be insulted. Number two, he used the term, and those who know Arabic, ضربا غير مبرح, that's light beating. You know how light beating was defined by Muslim jurists 1400 years ago? You'll be surprised and shocked when I tell you, when you compare it with California today. They said beating that does not leave a mark on the body. It's not in the face, it's not damaging any organ, but such a light beating that it doesn't leave a mark on the body. Even if you hit somebody like that, it could leave some redness. So it's light, it's almost like, come on, correct yourself. Does not leave a mark. Do you know that in the state of California, in the 20th century, in America today, the law there defines abuse of women or children as something that leaves a mark on the body, which means even if you just go with, say, all right, somebody hit me, and there's absolutely no sign of that, at least as physical abuse, that is not regarded as abuse. That's why there is no concept of abuse at all of wife, as some people might mistakenly interpret that. One jurist was once asked, what should I, beat, quote unquote, with, if I have to, if my wife really reached that level that only divorces the evil that is remaining? He said, with the miswak or something like it. You know what is miswak? Does any brother here has a miswak? Miswak is a natural thing that's used for toothbrushing. If you just raise it up a little bit, maybe our brother's miswak might not be a very big one, but you don't have a 3-meter miswak, obvious. So it means that basically it is a symbolical expression that, like I'd call it shock therapy, not 1,000 volts, a sort of shock that, come on, are you going to straighten, or our life will... Now, it is bad even to hit like that, even gently. But when you compare the greater evil of divorce, as the rule of Sharia says, that sometimes a lesser evil might be tolerated if it prevents a greater and more harsh evil. But after having said all that, there are two remaining things. What did the Prophet also say about beating? He said, the best of you, لَنْ يَضْرِبَ خِيَارَكُمْ, the best of you will never resort to that measure. The best of you will never do it. At one time, even he rebuked those who resort to that. And he said, some women came to my wives to complain against their husbands beating them. And he said, لَيْسُوا أُولَٰئِكَ بِخِيَارِكُمْ. These are not the best of you. And one time even he rebuked them in a stronger way. He said, doesn't one of you feel ashamed of himself to beat his wife like a cattle in the morning and then sleep with her at the end of the day? Once you put the qualifiers for it, you understand what condition goes with it, even as a lesser of two evils, the other one being divorce. And finally, I said there's one third element in the context that we didn't cover. What is it? Anybody remember? The occasion of revelation. Do you know what is the occasion of revelation of that verse? The occasion is that a woman in his time got into dispute with her husband. We don't know who is at fault. So her husband hit her. She came to the Prophet. She was not abused. I mean, she didn't have, like we see. By the way, if you look at the statistics about women abuse in America, it's tremendous. It's horrendous. It's not the gentle strike or anything of that nature that the Prophet spoke about. The people going bleeding with black eyes, with broken ribs. And the statistics show that a huge percentage are beaten by their husbands or even boyfriends. This has nothing to do with this. But the occasion of revelation that this woman came not really abused or bleeding or anything, but just, he said, oh, my husband hit me. So you know what the Prophet said? He said, you have the right to retaliate. That's his sense of justice as he interpreted it in good intention. He said, you go back, and as he did that to you, go and hit him. Before she left his house, the revelation came to him, and everybody knows when the revelation came to the Prophet, he comes under the state of very, severe tension and concentration, sometimes starting sweating, but not falling on the ground, sweating and concentrating. So the lady stayed. And that verse was revealed. So the Prophet's comment on the verse, you know what he said? أَرَدْنَا شَيْئًا وَأَرَادَ اللَّهُ أَمْرًا آخَرٍ. أو كما قال. He said, I wanted something. In other words, I tried to judge according to my own sense of justice as I saw it, but God wanted something different. So once you put it in that context, we avoid quoting one portion of one verse out of the surah, out of the context, out of the reason of revelation, out of the explanation in hadith, and perhaps this way we can come up with the proper interpretation in the context of the whole thing. Thank you very much for raising the question. It's a good one.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions from the floor? Yes.
Yes, Islam does allow, if need be, but of course the general rule is that a Muslim should marry to a committed, not any Muslim woman, a committed Muslim woman, but as a good gesture towards the people of the book who are closest to Islam, being part of the Abrahamic family tree. Islam does allow a Muslim male to get married to a female of the people of the book that's practicing or believing Jewish or Christian. No, that's not permitted in Islamic law, and there could be good reason for that also. Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, I answer you honestly in terms of the legal standpoint and comment also on what happens if somebody violates that. But as far as the law is concerned, the verse in the Quran is quite clear that it allowed in the case of the female. And there could be possibly good reason behind that. One is that in most cultures, I would say even in some pockets, even in North America, normally the husband seem to have more control on the family. Many of the decisions, of course there are variations, diversity even in Muslim countries, but on the whole, if you take the global community, still husbands do have greater control on the family. They are also more physically strong, comparatively speaking. I mean, on the average, if such an average exists. Of course, there are women also with black belt, karate and all that. But we're talking about the average. Now, given this fact, if a Muslim man who might have more control being male in the family gets married to a non-Muslim woman, his religion teaches him to respect her prophet, because Jesus and Moses are honored and revered by Muslims as our own prophet, not somebody else's prophet. They're prophets of Islam, the same generic submission to God that all prophets taught. Number two, his religion teaches him to accept the original revelation, even though it may not be available exactly in the same form, but the essence or original form of revelation given to her in a holy book. That's why they called people of the book, is to be respected. Thirdly, it teaches that, as the Quran specify in chapter 2, and I think it's verse 256, let be no compulsion in religion. He cannot compel her to accept his religion. One of the great imams or leaders of jurisprudence, Shafi'i, said that a Muslim male even has the duty to take his wife to her church if she wanted to listen to the preaching or exhortation. So there's a sort of tolerance that is taught there. Now, so a female who is not a Muslim is not at a disadvantage if the person, the Muslim male, is really a practicing Muslim. On the other hand, even though there could be variations and exceptions, an average Christian or Jew marrying a Muslim woman does not have the same feeling about Prophet Muhammad. He considered him a false prophet, considered the Quran a concocted book, and as such, the average, quote-unquote, person may not necessarily be entrusted enough to allow his Muslim wife to fully practice her faith. Suppose he doesn't believe in fasting, and a Muslim woman during her fasting during the day is not supposed to have intimate relationship with her husband. She have to wait until after sunset. And suppose he says, no, I don't care, I don't believe in that stuff, I want you now. That means her own spiritual worship, act of worship, cannot be guaranteed to be fully respected. I'm not saying that some people do not respect that, some are good. But the laws are made to protect the masses rather than the exceptional cases. As far as your second question, what happens if somebody violates that? It doesn't mean that a person is outside of the boundaries of faith. It means that the person made a mistake, did something which is unlawful from the standpoint of Islamic law. And my view has always been that whenever I'm asked that question in North America, because there are cases of some Muslim girls where the parents did not pay much attention to their Islamic upbringing, and they just like leave home and get married to a non-Muslim. In that case, my advice to them is that, don't destroy the bridges. Treat them with respect as humans, but make it clear to them also that you don't approve of that. In other words, you don't give legitimacy to something you know in your heart honestly that it's unlawful and wrong. But in the meantime, don't simply boycott them or throw them out, because someday their conscience may awaken. There might be cases even of their husbands on their own deciding to accept Islam, and the problem could be resolved. But I'm not saying it's legally right, to be honest, but I say one has to deal with it in wisdom and sensitivity.
Sister, short question and a short answer, Dr. Badawi.
Uncharacteristically short, eh?
Yes, sister.
Alaykum salam.
Justify the men community excluding her from participation in political issues and dialogue.
You said her voice? Is her voice? Okay, just to familiarize the audience with the term, because some are not familiar with it, she says, is the voice of woman, according to Islam, awra? Awra actually basically means something that should be covered or concealed. For example, if you say a person should not go out with, he should cover his private parts, or in the case of a female, she should try to conceal her beauty when she's in the company of other males other than certain categories like father, son, and brother, and so on, or in the privacy of her home or with other women. So that's the concept of awra, something that should not be exposed to the other sex. The answer is no. And the evidence to that comes both from the Quran and from hadith and from logic also. The three are not inconsistent in that particular issue. First of all, the Quran itself testifies that women spoke to the Prophet, and the Prophet did not say, I can't listen to you because your voice is a female voice, I shouldn't listen to you. There is one surah in the Quran, surah known as Al-Mujadila, the woman who came to argue with the Prophet because her husband was not fair to her and so on, and another issue other than the question of beating. And also the question, like we said historically, about that woman who came to complain that her husband beat her, and the Prophet said, go and beat him. That again shows that the Prophet listened to women. Secondly, from hadith literature, we find numerous ahadith that says a woman came and asked Prophet Muhammad, what should I do about such and such thing? So there are numerous references in hadith. Thirdly, we find also, logically speaking, that in the narration of hadith, this is something many of you might not be familiar with, the hadith doesn't just appear as a text, there is verification. And it says, Hassan heard from Umar, heard from John, heard from Robert, that he heard the Prophet ﷺ, Prophet Muhammad, saying such and such thing. So there are always chain of narration or people. And you find that in many of these saying of the Prophet, the narrator actually described a woman, even not just her voice. He says, a young woman with a dark face, for example, came to the Prophet and asked this or that question, which means that the covering of the face was not a universal requirement, that the voice of the woman was not regarded. But later on, as I indicated in the question of methodology, some jurists influenced by their culture, and they are humans, they are affected by culture, came with the what I consider to be a strange conclusion that the voice of woman in itself, if it speaks properly and straightforward, is awra. That's not the case. The only reference in the Quran that it says when women speak to men, they should speak in a way that's not seductive. You know, that's all. But it doesn't say don't speak. So the evidence is overwhelming that it is not. Again, that's the difference between culture and pure Islam.
Shinki.
Earlier you made mention about the curse you called pregnancy and childbirth. You said that it was not just on the woman, it was on the man and the woman. Is childbirth and pregnancy a curse in itself? What was the curse that was put on the man?
Well, I'm glad that you asked that question because I'd like to clarify misunderstanding arising maybe from my lack of precision. What I said concerning women, not men. I said in the case of women in Islam, the pregnancy and childbirth are not regarded as punishment for eating from the forbidden tree because there is no concept of original sin, nor does the Quran point the finger to Eve as the one who tempted Adam to eat from the tree. No, not at all. Actually, pregnancy and childbirth are regarded as blessings, not curse, for both men and women. There is no concept in the Quran cursing the earth or cursing this or cursing that because of a particular sin that was done by humans. No, it is a blessing for both. The Quran is very, for example, in one verse say that one of the signs of God, signs of His mercy, that He gave you children and grandchildren. It's regarded as blessing. But I was just making distinction. Allow me to be a bit frank on this. And I don't mean denigration in any way whatsoever. God knows it. Just for the sake of comparison, since many of you are religious study students and many, of course, are familiar with the Bible, that when you go to the book of Genesis, for example, frequently woman is regarded as the one who is responsible for the fall of man. The childbirth and pregnancy is mentioned specifically actually as a curse or a sort of punishment to remind woman of the sin that she did. What I was simply pointing out that for some people who might mix the story of creation in the Bible and the Quran because of many similarities, sometimes they miss these subtle and very significant differences, that this notion does not exist at all in the Quran. And furthermore, contrary even to this notion of cursing, we find that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, explained in no uncertain terms that a woman who dies during childbirth is in the highest level that any Muslim can achieve. She's like a martyr if she died as a result of childbirth. And about pregnancy, one of the verses I quoted earlier says, we commended upon mankind to be kind to his parents. His mother bore him in tribulation and difficulty after difficulty, which means that childbirth and suffering during that period is a reason not to remind women of their sin, but to adore women, to respect them, and to appreciate the difficulties they go through before they deliver, and even during delivery of the baby, sometimes even after.
Thank you, Dr. Jamal Badawi. We really enjoyed the presentation, and I also thank Dr. Khan for taking his time out, and Marla, thank you very much for coming and joining us, and especially those people who traveled from Columbia and Kent City to come over and join us during this happy and informative occasion. Now, we have recorded this speech, and it will be available at the Islamic Center in Warrensburg, so any one of you who wants to have a copy of it or wants to come and listen to it, you are most welcome. At the end, I will suggest that today the breakfast would be at about 6:07, and we will invite you to come over to the Islamic Center and have dinner with us, and we will pray together for a peaceful world for us to live in. Thank you very much. Dr. Jamal Badawi is here. If somebody wants to come and talk to him, you are most welcome.
Thanks very much for
questions.
Thank you. Enjoyed it. Very interesting session.
I thought you might
Sure.
Okay. Great.
I have a called 1100. Only $20 per answer, including the 16 final album answer. It's actually not problem. Both theoretically and historically. You want to give you that number?
Well, basically what I wanted to know is, I was born into
Yeah, I read it.
Yeah. I was always about, earlier with the introduction, you were saying that Egypt was like homeland, you know?
Oh, I was born in Egypt.
Oh, okay, because I was thinking he was trying to say that Egypt was like homeland for Muslims and whatnot, and I was like, when I was born,
One of the countries.
right.
Only 50 million Muslims compared to 1 billion. No, I think you're just talking about your experience in hospitality.
Right, I started to address the question of how I was always taught that Mecca Medina.
Oh, Mecca Medina was more.
Another thing I wanted to know is, I've been trying to get into how to join the Muslim associations and I was going to wait until I got here to have the number or where to go or where to go.
And then, will it be possible to send me a copy? Beginning my address? Which will have. Or maybe I'll tell you. They have some material on the table. There's one referring under the second about the same name. I would appreciate it. How much is the page? Dr. Said, no? Dr. Said? I think they have a literature. If you don't find it, please come back and give me.
And you have, and he has to leave now.
Yeah, obviously, want to catch the also, you can cancel.
عليك لانه you know that we should bring you on time.
Oh yes, that lecture in
Please spell your name again.
I wish more people were more forthcoming, but see, I felt that perhaps we didn't get this organized. But I thought perhaps first I wanted to get some feel of the conversation. Maybe because I don't like the selection here, because we don't have background. I think I can. Oh, yeah. University.
No, I like it. But I just like this way. Okay. Did you find the okay? Maybe I'll give you that. Is it required for women to wear like well, would they be I don't know how to